ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and our guest today is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
There I am. Okay. Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as
Great
always.
to see you. Yeah, of course. So today we got the news about the great Ukrainian attacks on Russian positions in Zaporizhia and Dnipro region. And Russians are blindsided. They cannot see anything or hear anything. And the Ukrainian forces are moving ahead as the Russians wouldn't even exist there. And actually, some of them are ceasing to exist as we speak. So this is in fact much more doing much more goods for Ukraine rather than this more than a year old negotiations, so-called peace negotiations. There is a peace negotiations which will be longer than the war itself.
Yeah.
Who needs it? The Ukraine lost its initiative. It's lost its spirit. It's lost its timing because nobody wants to go and fight and die. If there is a peace, maybe it will be in next hour and a half or so on. So this is so negative for Ukraine to be involved in this so-called peace negotiations. So
Well, right.
if
So
Ukraine would just stop it, then, of course, there could be no negotiations. Trump would go to and get busy with the tariffs and other stuff that he has on his plate, and so on. And then Ukraine would fight Russia one-on-one, despite how difficult proposition it is. But Ukrainians showed that they can do it. They did it in 2022, they did it in 23, and they do it now.
right. So they needed to find their footing. They needed to get the proper assemblage of weapons and material and figure out what exactly where the biggest Russian weaknesses are. And they began hitting the Russians in those weaknesses. And it's been paying off. The cumulative effect is showing up now. And so now, I'm surprised that the Ukrainians have been able to launch a counteroffensive on the eastern front of Ukraine rather than simply marshaling their strength and launching a big attack, which may well yet come. This may be another secondary operation to keep the Russians tied up and busy and unable to react, since their reinforcements are now less than their casualties, according to Ukraine. And so this is all working to Ukraine's good. And yeah, I encourage it. So the Ukrainian military will exploit this counterattack for as much advantage as they can gain from it. And then, if as I have been projecting, I still believe that the main counteroffensive, the decisive counteroffensive, will come in the sealing off of the Crimea. But this is a very good development. It is a very good development because it continues to show the weaknesses of the Russian army, and that the Ukrainians are fully capable of handling the Russians on their own if need be. And it would be nice if they got more enthusiastic support from the Europeans as well as from the United States. But right now, the Ukrainians are playing very well with the cards that they have been dealt. So they have the initiative, and they are forcing the Russians back. So this is a very interesting development. I must agree with you. It is showing that peace negotiations right now for the Ukrainians have demonstrated, okay, we don't need the peace negotiations if you're not willing to cooperate, so we will force you to agree one way or the other.
Ukrainians will be much more effective even in the peace negotiations, and of course on front lines. In case that they would remove certain people from all peace negotiations, Geschäft negotiations, and anything, the person number one is obviously Umerov. Umerov had meetings with FBI he was trip in Miami, and all what he was doing is trying to buy immunity for himself and few other people. So that's what's on his mind, his personal immunity, not the peace negotiations or Geschäft negotiations or anything. How can you send people like that to any negotiations? In fact, you have to jail them instead of sending them to negotiate. I don't understand why it's not clear to Zelensky. He's now fantasizing to please Trump about election and about referendum and all that stuff, and nobody even say a single word about the peace, at least for these 2 months during the election process. So there will be temporary peace. Go and do your election, a referendum, anything what you want to do. It's not there. So why are you hell talking even about the election and the all this stuff with immunity and with other issues when there is no any peace proposal, temporary peace proposal, at least for a time being. And Trump insists that by the 15th of May, June is the latest. There must be election, referendum, or whatever. But he's not guaranteeing anything. So
Yeah.
how can Zelensky, Zelensky say, okay, I want to do election. I want to do it as soon as possible. Okay, next hour and a half, I want to see election. How? How when there is a war, when there is a bombardment, daily bombardment of Ukrainian cities and killing people?
Zelensky's trying to do Zelensky is trying to do the best he can with a bad set of cards, with a bad hand. Okay, he has been dealt this politically bad hand by his allies, and now he has to finesse it and rely on the Ukrainian military to continue to gain successes on the battlefield, thus indirectly placing more political pressure on the European allies in the United States to back a winner. You remember, President Trump doesn't like to back losers. And so long as Ukraine keeps looking like a winner and demonstrating it on the battlefield, that puts pressure on President Trump not to look like a loser or an idiot. He doesn't want to look like either. So Zelensky is doing the right thing, and the Ukrainian military is right to take matters into their own hands and not rely on their allies to somehow bail them out. They have to keep that initiative and seize it so that the Russians have no good political cards to play. They certainly don't have any good military cards to play.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
I do believe that today, as it may sound strange, Zelensky is the biggest enemy of Ukrainian army because he is with this phony peace negotiations and phony promises of election, referendum, or so on. He is demoralizing Ukrainians and its army because they believe, oh, maybe there will be a peace, or why do we have to fight so hard, and so on. Okay, in fact, okay, let's go home. There is peace. You remember what's happened in Russia in 1916, 17?
Yep.
There was the army was simply unwilling to fight. We don't
Right.
want to fight. What are we fighting for? Our Tsar or for what? We don't need to fight. So
Right.
today, army can actually question: what are we fighting for? Zelensky or Merov maybe, or what else? We don't need that. Thankfully, it's not happening. Ukrainian army is, in my opinion, the best army in the world. They are
Well,
genuine
certainly the most
invest
experienced. Certainly the most
for
experienced.
experience,
They
absolutely.
are experienced and they have positive experience. They are shown that they are willing to adapt to the new conditions on the battlefield and take advantage of it. And really, they are in the very rare position of being able to teach the United States military on how 21st century warfare should be waged. This is a priceless advantage. And it's so long as they are in a position to do that and continue to demonstrate it on the battlefield the way they are doing now, then this, again, the thing I like to call the correlation of forces, the Soviets used to talk about, the correlation of forces is still visibly moving in favor of Ukraine. And so this is something that the Ukrainians should take advantage of while they still have the power to do it, to force the Russians into as uncomfortable and untenable a position as possible, so that even if their allies prove to be a bit wobbly or a bit hesitant to fully back Ukraine, Ukraine has it within its power to force a peace, at least an armistice, on the Russians, force a withdrawal.
Jonathan, my problem with what Zelensky is doing is this. He was absolutely right a year ago, February 29th, after this debut in the White House, and he was working extremely hard to fix the relationship with Trump, and he was going backward and all other ways to try to do it. Zelensky doesn't understand that for Trump, Ukraine doesn't exist. It's a little bit extension of Russia, which Russia always owned and will own eventually, and so on. So therefore, Trump never wholeheartedly would support Ukraine. Number one. Number two, um, when you are taking now, since already 2026, you'll take a table of help to Ukraine in the last 4 years. So who are they? There are European Unions, United States, and a few others which will be, you can dismiss it for practical purposes. You will see that most of the times it was about equal proportion. So this side would provide more finances and this more artillery and ammunition and weapons. So eventually it was equal for 3 years. In 2025, there was a zero help from US all the way, whether it's financial or arms or just anything, and almost 100% Europeans. Now, when Trump started its tariffs war against all world in April of 2025, and there was a complete rebuke from all over the world, and everybody objected to that. Some grudgingly agreed to it, for at least temporarily. Some people were very, very upset about it. So, with what was going farther and farther, so for a long time, Europeans were arguing Zelensky to keep up a relationship with Trump, regardless how difficult it is, but just keep it because Europeans themselves thought that, okay, with time, Trump will come back to his senses and everything will be normalized. So now, Europeans don't believe this theory anymore. Now they understand that US is an arch enemy of Europeans, and they are preparing all these counter things with including tariffs, new trade agreements and coalitions and so on. And Canada is leading that. If you remember Carney's speech and Davos, where he said that the middle powers, one on one, never have any chance to negotiate anything with a power like United States. And so therefore they have to have coalitions, negotiate together if it's possible to negotiate. Maybe it's not possible. So now all outside world, Europe, Japan, South Korea, they are now following Carney's policies. And you already see the result yesterday after signing of this in Brussels in the morning. So stock market tanked yesterday and it's continued to tank today. People don't understand why the stock market is tanking. Well, because there will be a lot of jobs lost as the result of it. The economy will not longer develop because the tariffs is a cornerstone of Trump's economic policy. If this tariffs are removed, it's unclear even what's his economic policy based on. It's a complete situation. So Zelensky should have at some point during the 2025, obviously around October, November, he should have sensed as a politician that he's trying to negotiate with Trump and have all these negotiations and so on is a futile. It's a waste of time. In fact, it creates more damage to Ukraine than anything else. So he should have stopped that track. Anyway, U.S. doesn't help Ukraine for the last since 2025. So just forget, okay, Mr. Trump, I appreciate all your efforts and hopefully it will work one day, but not now. So we are taking a break from these negotiations for now. Good luck and thanks a lot. So that would put things in the right perspective. So Ukraine would be realistically against Russia with all these consequences. It's not easy proposition, but it's a realistic one.
Yeah.
Instead of
Agreed.
smoke and mirrors, negotiations and disease and geschäft, diplomacy is flying here and there. So this would be a realistic, and that was Ukrainian people and Ukrainian army would be content with. That's what they understand. There is an enemy, you have to fight enemies the best you can. Now, when you're bringing the smoke and mirrors and negotiations, the Umerov is going there, and this guy is going over there, and I'm doing over here and there. This is a recipe to not even the not so nice peace. Actually, it could lead to surrender.
Yeah,
Tell the truth.
you could say that this current phase of diplomatic maneuvering and posturing would be a diplomatic version of the phony war back in 1939, 1940, where Britain and France were doing a lot of posturing vis-a-vis Germany, but not really taking any decisive action before Germany finally took its decisive action on the Western Front in May of 1940 when they invaded France and the Low Countries and basically knocked them out of the war. And so that was the military version. Now in 21st century, you're seeing the opposite in terms of diplomatic negotiations. You are seeing a version of phony diplomacy. A lot of phony, could arguably call phony diplomacy. A lot of posturing, a lot of meetings, a lot of, nice sounding sayings, but it doesn't have any effect on resolving the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And in this case, the military situation is moving in favor of Ukraine, and therefore Ukraine sees no need to engage seriously in this phony diplomacy. And therefore, so long as the situation keeps moving in their favor and the Russians become steadily weaker and weaker, and the other economic factors and demographic factors continue to kick in and weaken Russia even further, there's no incentive whatsoever for Ukraine to take seriously these
So why
diplomatic
why
maneuvers.
Ukraine even take part of this phony negotiations? Why do they need it really?
They want to. They want. Zelensky is in effect playing his part very well. He is engaged. He is playing his version of phony diplomacy. He is placating the Western. He's placating Europe, placating the U.S. Says, "Okay, I'm listening." And in the meantime, behind the scenes, with his military and with in secret, not telling the Western allies or the U.S. what they are going to do on the battlefield. They are going to let the Western allies find out for themselves and keep the Russians off balance. So that right now with these counterattacks by Ukraine, they are successfully keeping the Russians off balance. They are keeping their allies, the U.S. and European allies, honest by saying, "Well, looks like Ukraine isn't ready. Ukraine isn't ready to listen to us either, because they're not taking us seriously, and they don't deserve to be taken seriously. If the U.S. and Europe are not willing to engage in more positive measures to strengthen Ukraine's ability to drive the Russians out, Ukraine sees no need to take them seriously other than just a superficial diplomatic maneuver. Just keep them happy, keep them talking. In the meantime, we will take measures which will ensure our victory."
Okay, so far today is a wonderful day for Ukraine, and
Yes,
we'll see what the follow up will be. Very interesting analysis and very interesting publication in the Atlantic by Simon Schuster, who is personally he knows Zelensky for quite a few years, and there was very interesting material. I recommend anybody to read this and. I wouldn't comment on that. It's a very, very interesting material, and I think everyone should read. Maybe we will look over it next show on Tuesday. But
that
I just
sounds
wanted,
like a good candidate for a follow up. Yeah.
yeah, very interesting analysis is that after Ukrainian victories in 2022, Kiev, Kharkiv, Kherson, General Zaluzhny said that now is the very opportune time to negotiate a peace with Russia. because Russians now see that Ukrainian army is for real. They had their losses, so it was a good time. Now it was derailed by Zelensky and Yermak by removing Zaluzhny and 17 generals who were fighting with him and who already had the feel of victory. They already knew how to defeat Russians. All of them were removed. And what do you think is the explanation why were they all removed? My explanation is that they wanted to guarantee continuation of war, so Zelensky and Yermak and all others with them would be still in power. That's the only reason, because once there will be peace, there would be immediate election.
Right.
And it would be hardly imagine that Zelensky would win that election, because the question would be why the war started in the first place, why Zelensky couldn't prevent, why he was warned by United States and others that the Russians are accumulating their power on the border and it's imminent now. And Zelensky said, don't scare investors with this information. Leave me alone. I don't trust it. I don't believe it, and so on. We know what's happened. So, in my opinion, with all his heroics, which I can't deny, nobody can, I think presently Zelensky and his team is more a liability to Ukraine and Ukrainian people, and especially Ukrainian army, than anything else. That's my opinion. Unfortunately, I wish I could
Well,
differently.
no, it's not like I'm waiting for the word to come down from on high. Here is the ultimate truth. No, that's okay. No, I perfectly understand your perceptions and why you have honest disagreements and doubts about the current situation, because it's still in flux, and it is still a matter which needs to be finally settled on the battlefield before any meaningful political settlement can be reached. So right now we are still in this. Although I welcome Ukraine's current tactical initiative and its ability to seize the military initiative, I myself am still waiting for, anticipating the decisive counterblow. These are good. These are comparable again to a boxer launching a series of powerful left jabs and hooks, throwing his opponent off balance. That's what the Ukrainians are doing. They're throwing the Russians off balance and keeping them reacting to what the Ukrainians are doing, rather than planning any major counteroffensive themselves, which the Russians are increasingly less able to do as time goes on. And the economic and military factors and the damage that the Ukrainians are inflicting on Russian infrastructure continue to accumulate. So the more this goes on, the weaker overall, relative to Ukraine, the Russians are going to become. So,
Jonathan, furthermore to my point of rather very negative role of Zelensky and his cabinet at this time, I believe that the Ukrainians accumulated enough weapons and now financial aid with 90 billion euros. I think Ukraine is capable to have counterattacks available, the attack on Crimea, and many other things, maybe
yeah,
all at the same time. But
yeah,
I think Zelensky, by refusing doing that, he is very careful not to upset Trump, because Trump will say, "You idiot, we are talking about peace for your people, and you're now derailing that. I'm leaving negotiations. Good luck to you."
and Zelensky can sort of say, "Have a nice day. We've got what we need."
You're absolutely right. That's exactly the
Bye.
case.
Says,
That's
yeah,
exactly
and Zelensky could follow up with President Trump and say, oh, by the way, contrary to your belief, yes, I do have the cards.
He does have cards. And also, is Trump going away from $12 trillion deal with Putin? I don't
I
believe
don't.
the deal itself, and I don't believe that he will walk away.
That's such an obvious sucker play.
Oh
That
my
is what we would call a sucker play, and it's Russia does not have 12 trillion to give. It doesn't have. It doesn't. It's an illusion. It's a promise with no backing or substance behind it. So President Trump and his advisors should be able to see through that. They're not so naive as to fall for that.
But tell me, Jonathan, why would that made headlines in Western press and everywhere? It's a bogus. Any idiot understand that. So why would it make it all to the press?
Why would it make it to the press? Because the press, the Western press, in particular the American press, the majority of the American press, is now in a habit of they are getting back to the period of U.S. history which we know as yellow journalism, sensationalist, whatever grabs headlines. The motto of that era would be: if it bleeds, it leads, or 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 whatever grabs attention, whatever causes readers to pick up their newspapers and buy it. And how do you do that? You do that with sensationalistic news that people just, oh, I've got to read about that. And so they buy a newspaper or they buy whatever service they're offering. And that is what the Western press, and they tend to go for sensationalist news, not news that is necessary, news that is truthful, news that is based on honest research and reporting. That tends to be a lot more boring. It's not as exciting. The truth may not be as exciting, so they tend not to go for it. So right now, it's until you get to other sources of news who are willing to argue the other side of the story, who are able to provide balance. That is where you gain your long-term readership, as they establish a reputation for integrity, for honesty, for reporting the news as it is, not as we think it should be. That is the key difference. But it takes a while for those types of news organizations to gain credibility, to outdo the sensationalists, the headline grabbers. That's what you have to be careful of. And that is why, by the way, that is why, as a good intelligence officer, I look at a variety of conflicting news sources, news that don't all tell the same story, so that you have to then weigh all of those sources, and then you find that the truth is not strictly on one side or the other, but you find the truth buried somewhere in the middle. And that is where you have to mine those sources and put together a more balanced, coherent perspective.
Jonathan, I would like to ask you why nobody, no news organization or media organization, would suggest to agree to this $12 trillion deal and ask Russians for $1 billion deposit.
Call their bluff. Let's say, hey, let's see. Show me the money. Show me
It
the
reminds me one of my favorite stories about two Jewish businessmen negotiating the purchase of the gold mine in Florida. So one is sitting in Florida negotiating, another one is in New York. So after several days of negotiations back and forth, finally the guy from Florida phones to New York and says, I have great news, one good news and one not so good news. He says, start with the good news. The good news is I just finished negotiations. Everything is done. Gold mine is ours. It's only $15 million and it's done deal. Oh, it's a great news. And so what is the bad news? Well, the bad news, they asked for $500 deposit.
Which tells you they don't have any cash on hand worthy of the name. They are what we the phrase used to be called. They are what we call flim flam men.
Yeah. Another thing is that again, since Trump really master negotiator, and why wouldn't he ask to raise 12 trillion to maybe 15 trillion, maybe 17.5 trillion?
Why don't you offer to pay off our entire national debt of 38 trillion while you're at it?
Yeah, and do it half now and half when we will consume the deal.
If you're so wealthy, you've got that much cash to throw around.
Yeah, they're very wealthy, except that their GDP is less than $2 trillion and shrinking as we speak.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, right after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, the total GDP of the Russian Federation in the early 90s was estimated at that time to be about 12% of the GDP of the United States. Yeah, the United States had a GDP 8 times larger than that of the Russian Federation. Wait, all the other independent republics, they had their own little, much smaller GDPs. But now, and it wasn't until, let's see. Well, remember that story I told you about that when I went to Russia, to Moscow, back in 1992, and my colleagues and I went to a Russian restaurant on the outskirts of Moscow, and I was just being a good tourist and listening to their stories and so forth. And we had that nice 5-course Russian meal with vodka and all the nice little trimmings that you would associate with a good Russian meal. And the bill came. And recall at the time, the official exchange rate was 90 rubles to the dollar. Okay. Yeah, it was already going down. And I saw the bill, and we were paying in rubles, and I did the math in my head, and that 5-course Russian meal for 5 people, something which would cost several $100s easily in the United States if we were to do it at a Russian restaurant, few though they are in the United States, it would have cost that several $100s. I did the math. It cost us $18. That's insane. And when you keep in mind, that was only the start of the collapse. By 1998, the Russian exchange rate to the dollar was around 5,000 to the dollar. That same meal would cost us pennies.
And it defaulted.
It defaulted, and they knocked several zeros off the new reissued Russian currency. And it still is not, the situation for the Russians isn't much better today. It's like that saying I heard. It says, if you want to feel like a rich man, go to Moscow. If you want to feel like a poor man, go to Tokyo.
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right, Jonathan.
You look at these. Our readers, our listeners always must remember that you have to look at these current events in the light of history. You can't just assume that these are events that are occurring in a vacuum, all by themselves, with nothing that causes them or leads up to them. And this is the service we provide. And our man in Kiev, Ivan, he provides that crucial third perspective, the man on the spot, the man in Kiev, the man who has the most to lose from a Ukrainian loss. One of the greatest things he could lose. And so we have to provide that series of 3 perspectives, yours from Ukraine, mine from the American side, and the 3 of us trying to provide this balanced set of perspectives so that the readers can gain that most precious of all commodities, truth. It's very hard to buy, almost impossible.
It's almost impossible. There are so many different opinions. It all depends whom you're listening to. The 2 people who yesterday were the closest friends, they cannot even talk to each other because they're listening to different medias, unfortunately. But anyway, Jonathan, thank you so much for today's program. We are trying to clear up what's happening the best we can. But I think on Tuesday with our man in Kiev, we will be able to...
We will have greater clarity. The smoke will begin to clear from the battlefield, and we'll be able to see even more clearly just how much more the situation is shifting in favor of Ukraine. I'm still quietly rooting and praying for that decisive counterblow by the Ukrainian military that will knock the Russian army down and finally force it to admit defeat.
Yes, Jonathan, I 100% agree with you. And I think today's Ukrainian attack is getting us to a little bit closer to that day that we are all waiting for.
One has to be patient.
Yeah, just have to be patient. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Have a great weekend, and all our listeners. All the best to you. See you on Tuesday, same place, same time. Glory to Ukraine.
God bless America, and God bless Ukraine as well.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everybody.